space. We got a few emails asking for some support finding your password. So we'll talk through what's going on there. We'll talk about navigating Slack. We'll talk about what GitHub is, and we'll talk about writing project briefs and tips for team traction. And that's totally okay, Luke, that you haven't joined a team yet. Behind the scenes today, but actually we're not behind the scenes anymore on Kaltura. You can see us, and actually I'll make myself a host so that you can see me, and feel free to move my video anywhere on your screen so that it doesn't cover the slides. But I'm Jess Jackson. I am the xAPI Cohort host, and I am so glad to be here with everyone and to learn with you. We have Aaron behind the scenes helping with tech. Aaron and Jamie are helping with any tech issues that come up. So if you have any questions, feel free to tag them in the chat, ask them. And then we always have Megan Torrance, our leading xAPI evangelist and Torrance Learning's Chief Energy Officer, who can help answer any questions that you might have around the industry. She's been leading the charge around xAPI adoption and sharing stories around how to use this for years now. So we're all glad to be here with you and to share this space. Before we get started, every cohort we're going to start engaging on social media. So I have for you, you can go ahead and take a screenshot of this graphic. We're also going to be posting that on the GNOME social media, but you can go ahead and tweet out what your learning goals are this semester. So let us know why you joined the Fall 2020 xAPI Cohort, and then use that hashtag xAPI Cohort to really share it out and get it amplified. So go ahead and take a moment to share that story, and we'll retweet, we'll engage. We want to see you out there in virtual space. All right. So we'll walk through a little bit about where we are. So for those of you who are just joining us for the first time today, welcome. It is never too late to join Cohort. This is a very flexible learning environment. We have different places where learning is happening. So the xAPI Learning Cohort is free. It's virtual and vendor neutral. It's 12 weeks. So we are currently in week 2. And we hope that you do a lot of learning by doing and project-based learning and team learning. And where that happens is right here every week in our Kaltura live room from 2 to 3. We are here live where you can ask questions and be present if you are able. If you are not, the recordings are shared freely, so you can always catch up when you can on your own time. And that is how we make this space more flexible and accessible for you. In addition to these web sessions where you're hearing from folks that are using xAPI in their work, that are thought leaders in the industry, and sharing out some best practices, we also have the project teams. And project teams are meeting in Slack, building community in Slack, and really working together whenever they can to kind of practice applying what they're learning in Cohort. In addition to these spaces, we also have weekly emails and updates that go out with our web session recordings so that folks who are not able to be here can also join in. So that's a little bit about where Cohort is happening, what Cohort is, and where we are in the process. So we have 12 weeks together, and for the first 3 weeks, it's really about forming together, getting to know each other, getting to know what xAPI is, getting to know the capabilities. And then you kind of go into, once we get into that second month of Cohort, we dig into the details. We start thinking about what projects can be. We start putting things into practice with our project teams. We start iterating, assigning tasks, meeting. And then for the final section of Cohort, that last 3 weeks, we're really applying what we learn and thinking about next steps. We're sharing out, we're working out loud, and it is designed in that way. So if you don't know what team you are, and I saw someone said that I'm not on a team yet, I don't know what I'm doing, that's perfectly fine and normal for where we are in the semester. This week, as I shared, we are going to be talking about our project briefs and tips for team traction. And we'll be learning about how to send data from e-learning tools. Next week, we're going to be getting the free tools and the free access to tools that are available to members of Cohort, and we'll talk about where your team should be. Next week will be our last week that we don't have team updates, because then following that, we're going to have team check-ins. So teams will be sharing out where they are, what they're doing, what they're working on, and we will also still have our web session facilitators or our presenters. So next week we have Matt Cleaver is going to be sharing about how to send data from things that are not e-learning. So one of the values, the core value of xAPI is that it's interoperable, right? So it doesn't only have to be e-learning that we're capturing data from. And Matt's going to give some examples on how to do that with things that are not e-learning. So stay tuned for that. We will then move into learning more about the new learning ecosystem and the LRS, talking all about receiving data. We're going to talk about how to get buy-in and make a business case for using xAPI. We'll move into sending better data and using xAPI profiles. We're going to talk about xAPI and LXP and the role of LXP. We'll have some case studies where folks are sharing about how it relates to their industries and their work. And then we get into project team demos for the last 2 weeks of Cohort, where you're actually sharing out the things that you've learned in Cohort. Get excited. We have a really robust semester ahead of us, and hopefully it will impact your projects and you'll be able to find the things that you need. All right, with that, I'm going to introduce Leanne, who is our course development team lead here at Torrance Learning, and she's going to share a little bit about how to send data from e-learning tools, specifically Storyline.
All right, I'm just going to get my screen share set up here really quickly. All right. Let's see. All right, can everybody see a giant slide?
Looking great, Leanne.
All right, perfect. Well, hello, everybody. I guess the nice thing about being on camera is that I can actually say hi and I can wave, and it's almost like being able to greet you in person. I just want to start off by saying thanks for tuning in today while we talk about sending data from e-learning tools. I'm really excited to share a little bit about what we've done on a particular project at Torrance Learning, and also to hear what Brian has to say about sending data from Captivate in part 2 of today's session. So Jess queued me up a little bit in terms of the fact that I work at Torrance Learning and I'm the course development team lead. What that basically means is that I get to work with a really talented, really awesome group of people every day and geek out about things like visual design and authoring tools. So today's topic is right up my alley. I'll keep the intros kind of short and sweet, as I know that what you're really interested in hearing about is more about xAPI and Storyline. So I want to make sure that I deliver on that. Today, I'm going to share a little bit about how we used Storyline and xAPI to get rich data on a particular project that we did at Torrance Learning. If you've come to the last couple of xAPI parties, there's a chance you've heard me talk a little bit about this project before. We codename all of our projects at Torrance Learning for client confidentiality. So this one's codename was Waterproof. Waterproof was a project that we did for a global science materials company. Their goal was to increase the productivity and performance of their sales teams by defining a new sales coaching culture. So since the client is a global company, a big part of this effort revolved around making sure that everybody was using the same terminology and the same tools. And the sales leaders had the support that they needed so that they could in turn support their teams. So we work directly with one of our clients' content partners to create several different deliverables to meet their needs. I'm going to go over those just really quickly. There was a self-assessment piece that was used at the beginning and the end of the learner's journey to focus on and track areas of growth. There is an e-learning course, which is really what I'll be focusing on today, which covered the benefits of coaching and why it was valuable. There were ILT and VILT, so instructor-led or virtual instructor-led training, which provided learners with a safe space to discuss their experiences and learn coaching best practices. There was a toolkit that provided ongoing support for associates as they went through their learning journey. And then there was a curriculum for cohort groups, which helped folks internalize what they were learning in their regular practice. As I mentioned today, I'll be focusing mostly on the e-learning component, but I wanted to highlight the learning journey and the deliverables in their entirety because one of the key benefits to xAPI is interoperability, and Waterproof was a project in which xAPI allowed us to not only get rich data from each of the deliverables, but to use that data to look at the larger picture and kind of capture a broader picture of the use and the success of the rollout, which is something that just isn't possible with SCORM. So let's talk a little bit about what Storyline can do out of the box when it comes to xAPI. There's a basic set of statements that Storyline can send automatically. I've included a list of those verbs on the screen here. So the verbs that Storyline uses is attempted, which a statement with that verb will indicate that the course has been started. Experienced, which is used to indicate that a slide has been viewed. The answered, which indicates that a survey or a scored question has been answered. There's completed, which indicates course completion based on either the number of screens viewed or the completion of a survey. And then there's passed or failed, which indicates completion based on a passing or failing score for a set of scored questions. So that's kind of right out of the box there. As you can see though, and if you're familiar with SCORM, that's basically the same set of information that you can get with SCORM. It just is like xAPI-ified, which of course is an official term. So depending on your organization's needs or your client's needs, that may be enough. But one of the reasons why xAPI is so exciting and so useful is because it allows us to gain deeper insight into the learner and the learning experience. So while we don't necessarily get as much depth right out of the box, we definitely can get more from Storyline if we use custom JavaScript. So if you're like me and you're not a programmer, the words custom JavaScript, or maybe just the word JavaScript in general, can sound a little scary, but it doesn't have to be. In some cases, you may work with a programmer, so it may be that you pass this off to a programmer on your team, but it can also be incentive for a little bit of professional development. I know this great free vendor-neutral 12-week learning by doing project-based team experience called the xAPI Cohort, and that's a great way to build the knowledge that you need to be able to send statements from Storyline. So I know there are a lot of people here that can help you. And there are also a lot of people that are also trying to learn. So I think maybe if you can start finding each other in the chat or in Slack, if you haven't already, this would be a great opportunity to kind of build some support in that journey. There are also tools like xAPI, which I won't go super into depth about, but that's what we used for this particular project. xAPI is a statement builder that allows you to get richer data from e-learning courses. So specifically, it creates the JavaScript triggers that you need to send xAPI statements to an LRS of your choice. There are a few screenshots on screen here to give you a sense of that experience. You basically step through a wizard and you end up with the code that you need to copy and paste into Storyline. And so I know Jess actually queued this up really nicely, is next week there's going to be some more discussion about free tools that you can use during cohort, and xAPI is one of them. So if you're interested in exploring xAPI for a cohort project, you can certainly get set up with that. So as far as Storyline and xAPI go in terms of publish settings, xAPI is also sometimes called the Tin Can API, which is what xAPI is called in Storyline. So when you're ready to publish, you'll want to publish for LMS and then select Tin Can API from the LMS options dropdown. You may need to work with your LMS provider to determine whether any modifications need to be made to the identifier or the launch URL. So I won't be able to get super in depth about any modifications on this in particular, because that may vary depending on what your needs are and what LMS or LRS you're using. But I wanted to bring awareness to where you'll need to navigate to and kind of what the basic publish needs are. Articulate also has support articles and additional information on their website for publishing to xAPI that might be useful once you get to this stage as well. So I just talked about how JavaScript helps us get richer xAPI data out of Storyline. And so I want to use Waterproof as an example for, like, what does that really look like? This is one of the interactions that we had in Waterproof. Learners were asked to select why coaching seemed valuable to them at both the beginning of their of the e-learning course and then also at the end. So they had an opportunity to reevaluate what they found valuable after they got through all the content. So we used xAPI to capture what they selected at the beginning and at the end, which gave our client some insight that they could use for deeper discussion around why. So this is a screenshot of the data. In this case, we had used the Watershed LRS. And so this is a screenshot of learner selections in the beginning. And this data could be meaningful to our client in terms of identifying areas going into the e-learning that learners valued the most. We do capture what the learners discarded as well. So the blue, if it's hard to see the screenshot here, the blue represents what learners ended up selecting and the green represents what they discarded. But since this is the beginning of the learning journey, it kind of doesn't really tell us much aside from the fact that they discarded it. So I think if we were to redo what we are capturing on the before interaction, it might make most sense just to capture the selected values when the learner leaves the screen. But it is interesting to see that we do have the capability with xAPI to capture both what they ended up selecting and kind of what maybe their thought process was prior to that final selection. This is a screenshot of the data for the one at the end. So here's where things get a little bit more interesting. This is where they have the opportunity to kind of reevaluate what they find valuable. You can see that there are a lot more discards in many cases. What's unclear, though, in this case is that it's not clear whether it means that learners discarded what they chose originally, or whether they selected new things and then decided against it. So there's a little bit of nebulousness there, but on a couple items, you'll see that there were more discards than selections. So I think it gives us a little bit of a sense that there were learners who discarded some of their selections from the original screen at the beginning. And so I just mentioned like a little bit of the nebulousness that can happen with the data. So I think it's important to note that we can't always draw like immediately clear conclusions from the data alone. But the data is valuable because it helps shape or inform some meaningful conversations for our client. And so, for example, like the information that's gathered from this interaction could be a talking point amongst leadership or learners. And it also shows that learners were engaged with the course, you know, at the end, especially because this wasn't anything that was locked down. So learners could have just clicked next and gone on to the next screen, but they were still clicking, selecting new answers, and that sort of thing. This was another example of an interaction from the course that we used xAPI on. This was a click to reveal, and none of the click to reveal screens that we used in this course were locked down. So again, some of the data revealed that there was generally pretty good engagement with these screens in terms of clicks. We did see a bit of a drop off at the end of kind of the last clicks there, so steps 5 and 6. But again, good for us to see, you know, were learners still interacting with the course at this point in time? You know, were they going through everything, or did they just click on the first one and move on? So it was nice to see that. Again, there was good engagement on these screens. This particular screen had a hint button on it. We used xAPI to find out how many people were clicking on it for help. The data showed us that there weren't a lot of people clicking on it, maybe an average of 1 in 6 users. Again, we can't always draw super clear conclusions from the data alone, but discussion with the client could be around, you know, do we track more data on the hint button moving forward? And if we do, if we find that there's still low engagement, you know, what kind of actions can we take? You know, do we ditch the hint button? Do we find that we don't need it to begin with? Do we think that there's a way for us to figure out whether learners didn't need the hint, or whether they just weren't taking the time to engage with the hint button? Again, the data allows us to kind of have further conversations and kind of figure out how that might inform either client decisions or maybe changes to the course in the future. We also used xAPI to capture text responses. I don't think anybody here will be surprised that in some cases there were really great responses. In other cases, there were some kind of empty or throwaway responses. But even that breakdown allows us to gain some insight into overall engagement with the course. It's also helpful for the leaders to see how are associates responding. You know, how would they address situations like the one with, in this case, there was a scenario with this kind mic, and kind of how does that stack up with the ideal response. So just a few other things that we tracked. We had multiple choice questions and select all the apply questions. Those were locked down, so the learner had to get them right before they could move on. But what we found from the data was that it seemed to indicate that learners were actually trying to get things right the first time. So then what actually became more interesting was the wrong answers. And so our client could look at that and kind of see, you know, where are learners maybe not quite connecting with the concepts? Where might there be some confusion? What might they think the answers are instead. So again, the data helps inform some interesting conversations, some areas maybe that were unclear or that need some more support. We also used xAPI to kind of reveal how learners were interacting with like audio files, because we had some cases in which there were some scenarios that were voiced over. So we were able to see, does the audio need to be, did it get replayed a lot? And then, we could have conversations as to like, why might that be? So that's basically what I've got for you today. Just kind of a high level look at what's possible with Storyline and xAPI, as well as some examples as to the value that xAPI can do to kind of deepen our insight into our e-learning courses. So that's basically what I have for you today. If I know there are going to be some questions. I'll leave some space for that. But if you have any follow-up after today, or you want to keep in touch, I've listed some contact information on the screen here. So my email, you can find me on LinkedIn, as well as if you want to connect to the Torrance Learning team and these fine folks on the right here on social media, then you can go ahead and do that. And with that, I will stop sharing. And then see maybe what I've missed in the chat.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Leanne. There's a question around explaining the JavaScript. How are they doing the magic? That was it. That wasn't answered. But with that, I'll tee up Brian to talk a little bit about sending xAPI data from Adobe Captivate.
All right, thank you. Couple of things, couple of disclaimers, if you will. So when Jess reached out a couple of weeks ago and said, hey, would you present on Captivate? I said, yeah, absolutely. This goes way back, and I've been messing around with Captivate forever. And then realized I don't have a licensed version of Captivate anymore. I switched careers early on in 2020, and my license went along with that career switch. But I will say that I know Captivate pretty well. I was able to dig some stuff out of the archives that I'll share with you. And, it really was a journey for me with Captivate. I'll give you a little bit of background. So I've been doing xAPI and Tin Can. Like, I fell in love with it from the first time I heard about it, probably 6 years ago now, and immediately said, okay, I need to figure out how to work this into my e-learning and what we're doing every day. And really where, and when you talk to anyone about xAPI, and at the time when I was talking to my particular LRS vendor, like, oh yeah, it's easy. You just hook it up and it works. And well, I found out very quickly that it wasn't the case. But what it did inspire me to do is figure out how to get it done, right? And the way that I did that was by learning JavaScript and learning everything upside and down about how xAPI worked, how APIs worked, how I could send it to my LRS and do all of that stuff. And then that brought me kind of full circle back to where I started, which is I really want to get Captivate, reporting in good xAPI that's usable. So let's talk about Captivate out of the box. As I said, I tried to put together something last night. I even tried to download the demo version, but I'd already used my trial. So they wouldn't let me have another 30-day trial. But I do remember some things about Captivate out of the box. That is, you can publish directly to Tin Can, but here's where it gets, or that's the standard that I think they maybe updated it to xAPI now. But here's where it gets a little bit tricky. If you were to take that content and put it on an LMS, or more recently, I've been using an LXP that is xAPI compliant, it works pretty well. You just publish it, you put it onto your platform, and then it's capturing that xAPI for you. But most of the LMSs that we're on today, like my main LMS is Bridge, is the one we use every day. Bridge doesn't have the ability yet to capture xAPI statements. They're still kind of stuck in the SCORM world. So if you switch to xAPI in Captivate instead of SCORM, what does that mean? I think the best way in this, I don't know if it's been used this cohort yet, but it's been used in cohorts prior, is you get very SCORMy xAPI. Now, what does very SCORMy xAPI mean? Well, we're all pretty familiar with, I mean, you may not be familiar with the actual what's coming out of SCORM, but you know what it means, right? You can see when your learner launched the learning, when usually, if they're in progress, if they've gotten to the end, if they've answered some questions, and finally, the all magical passed, failed, complete, that part, that usually is what we're looking at in the LMS from kind of a compliance sort of standpoint. I've always been kind of a nitty-gritty kind of guy. So instead of putting slides together, I figure let's just dive into some xAPI. And I realize some of you are brand new to xAPI, and like these statements are going to look like a bunch of gobbledygook, but I'll try to go slow and I'll try to explain what I'm showing here. So let me get my desktop shared. Okay, so first, let's talk about what you're looking at here. This is the Watershed LRS. I have a personal instance that I use for stuff. This is actually, I'm the experienced platform manager for Southern Glazers, so I actually used our LRS just because I knew I had some SCORMy xAPI in there. I could kind of share with you all to show you what I was talking about. So if I come down here, this was a course that is a SCORM course, was launched in SCORM, and here's what it's reporting in, or it was launched in xAPI, but you can kind of see what it's giving you as far as SCORM data goes. So I launched it, I completed it, I passed it, I satisfied it, and then even some answers on some questions I did. But that's about all the more data that you get out of, if you take a publishing tool, very similar to what Leanne was showing. It's like SCORM, but now we've converted that into xAPI. So there's some value in that if you want all of your data in one reporting platform. But really the magic of xAPI is we can know everything if we've got the right statements coming in, right? So that was really what I set out to do. So you can, and I apologize if any of you are really interested in my portion being about how you can use Captivate out of the box for xAPI. The only other thing that I'll tell you is if you do mount it on your LMS, it is possible to also send to your LRS out of the box, but there's a configuration file that personally I never had a whole lot of luck with, being able to configure my LRS to report from my LMS. So that's when I decided to roll my own. About 2 cohorts ago, it was probably the biggest undertaking I've ever taken as a coder, and I'm doing that in quotes because I'm very much a weekend tinkerer, but I knew exactly what I wanted to do, and that was capture everything there was to know in Captivate. So I put together a project to do that. So let me show you, let me switch to this. And again, I apologize, I would have cleaned this up. This is an old version that I was able to find. But one of the first problems that you have when you're trying to capture, especially if it's not hosted on an LMS, is to capture who your user is, right? The first thing that we need in the next API statement is who is our actor? Well, some of these things you can publish, straight out to HTML, but you don't know who your actor is. So one of the things that I made Captivate do is if the LMS is passing in the value or you're passing in the value, then it knows who the actor is and it'll skip past the screen. But because I went to this, and you're all welcome to try, like I said, I will update this in the next couple of weeks. I should be getting a license to Captivate again, and I'll update this. But this is and I'll post all of these things on our Slack channel as well, so you can try them out after the fact. But because I'm not passing in an email address in the URL here, before it even lets me get into the Captivate, this wrapper takes over and asks me who I am. So I'm just going to put in an email address here, and I'll just use my work email address and enter. And what you can see that did is this is the wrapper sitting on top of Captivate. So before it let Captivate load, it actually interceded and said, nope, I'm going to make that screen blank and put that over there. And now it just reloaded it, and now it passed in the value that I have. You can see in the URL, it's passing in who the actor is. So another neat thing about this wrapper is if you want to host it on someplace other than an LMS, just a website, you can send a link to your user that incorporates their email address, and then you've got your actor right off of the bat. So that's another neat thing. So this is just something I put together to sort of explain some of the differences. I thought I was going to grab this Twitter tag and I never did. So don't try to reach me there. It's a neat Twitter tag, but it doesn't work. So just so you know, like I said, I wished I could have updated this. But let me just go through a few slides. So if I take it to the next slide, it just takes you through a nice overview of some of the different things that you need in order for xAPI, the actor, verb, activity, all of the stuff that you had. It's a little intro to that. And I'm kind of just cruising through this because I'm just trying to generate interactions on the backside so I can show you the difference between out-of-the-box authoring and what you can do with xAPI when you really put your mind to it. So one of the things that I wanted to do was bring that back in for the user so you could see it if you didn't have access to an LRS. So I created this little button right here, and this in real time is loading my LRS data back into Captivate so I can see the statements that we just generated. This is slide 3. We just entered it. There's the statement showing that I just entered slide 3. And I'll show you this in the actual LRS here in a minute. Let me move on. And I'm just going to go to the next slide here real quick because this is where the crux of some of the interactions are. So these were the main verbs. It's extended quite a bit further than this, but here's some of the main verbs that decided to use. These all came out of the xAPI registry. You know, that's a question I get a lot of times is what verb should we use? What's the standard for that? Where do we find the standard for that? And I know those tools are out there, and just keep in mind, like, it's a great idea to use a standard, but that standard doesn't necessarily have to be what everybody else is using. It's what makes the most sense for you. But the biggest thing that I've learned is stay consistent. Governance, right? If you're deciding that you're going to put together these different verbs for whatever it is that you're using, make sure you write it down so that the next time you use it 3 months from now, you remember the logic that you had for why you chose that verb schema and some of those different things. And I know a little later in the cohort, we'll talk a lot more about schemas and governance and that sort of thing. So I'm just going to real quickly go through and click each one of these. And really, it's just telling you what it's capturing and why down there at the bottom. And again, all I'm trying to do is generate some different statements here that we can take a look at. That should do the trick. So now let's switch over to another instance of Watershed. And let me refresh this. Okay, and these, all of the things, you remember I just did accessed, entered, viewed. So we made sure that we generated each one of those verbs, or it actually is showing that I pressed the button viewed. So that's one of the really neat things that I like about Captivate. Everything in Captivate is nameable and is an object. So every slide has a name, every button has a name, potentially. It just said it's generic, button 1, but I can rename it anything I want it. So in these cases, I rename those objects viewed, entered, accessed, so that when I looked at it in the LRS, the context would make sense to me. And that's one of the other things that I really think is neat about xAPI is you can create these statements that make sense to you. It's not hunt and peck and trying to figure out what exactly happened there. You can engineer it exactly how you need it. So let's kind of start at the beginning of the project. And you can see, again, I recycled this. The job that I have today, I created an online resume hooked up to xAPI and then demoed it back to the person looking at my resume. That's why it says Brian Floyd's online resume, even though this isn't really it. When you look here, you've got a couple of different things. So the first thing that you would expect is that you view the slide. Or enter the slide, right? So I opened up the slide, and if I look at that a little bit closer, here's the whole xAPI statement. So again, for any of you that haven't seen xAPI before, this is what it is. And you know, the hardest thing to get past is all these brackets and commas and quotes and all that stuff. Once that kind of falls away, all I see here is action, right? But that's from looking at it many, many times over and over again. I don't see any of the punctuation anymore, but I still remember when I started with all of this, the punctuation was absolutely all I could think about as I looked at these statements. So let's just take a look here at some of the stuff that's going on. So Again, I just put in a mock verb. This is a very bad example of how you would form your ID for a verb, but just for this particular thing, I just wanted to put in a test. You can make the readable here, entered slide. This really gets into what slide I was on. So this is slide 2. The name of my slide was, "Who are you?" And the description was, I just added the word entered to there. And then I always am a big fan of context, right? Context is all of the stuff about that particular thing. So that's how you can group together things like someone asked the question, is it possible to have like 5 or 6 different courses, but report on them all holistically? It absolutely is, using context. So you would put them all together in the same group that you wanted to report on. And then in your LRS, you'll say, give me all the statements that are associated with this group. And then maybe, and you can even get more myopic than that and show me just the viewed statements for this particular group, or just the click statements, that sort of thing, and really see whatever you want to. So one of the things that's neat here is you enter the slide. That's great. We all know that, if a user progresses through e-learning, that they've entered the slide, but what you don't necessarily know is how long they've spent on that slide before they've advanced, or if they went back to it, some of that sort of stuff. So that's why we've got 2 verbs here. Entered means you open the slide up. Viewed means you've now left that slide, and I hope it's here. Yep, there it is. I was on that slide, so the duration for 19 seconds before I advanced. So that can get to be, now we can know, are people pencil whipping through our courses? Are they hitting that advance button as soon as it comes up to race to the end? Or are they actually spending the time that we hope they are, actually engaging with it and reading and doing what we would expect? Another thing too, moving up here, so let's get into some of those different button actions that we have. So if we come here, now, a lot of the things that we can do in Captivate is interacting with different things, drag and drop interactions, click interactions, drop interactions. So this is going to give you some of those examples. So here we can see that we clicked, or actually here I did use a xAPI vocab one here, and you can see that pressed was the verb that we used, right? And I chose that one to use for click boxes, where buttons, I actually used a different verb because I wanted to differentiate and Captivate, because a button, everybody knows what a button is, but a click box in Captivate can sit over the top of anything. It could sit over the top of a picture, over an object. It could sit over nothing or text. So you might interact with that very differently than you would interact with a button. So I thought it was very important that we captured some of those things that way as well. Kind of the final thing that I guess I'll leave this with is going back to the dashboard here, is all of the things that we can know because of context and grouping. And these are, again, some old examples. As a matter of fact, the last time that I presented my project, Amanda Show You xAPI, that was me when I did my thing. Sorry, I'm a dad. Dad jokes are kind of my thing. You can see here that very easily I was able to roll up a lot of different information about just running through this particular thing. So, we can see how many times I accessed the course, how many times I actually finished the course. One of the other things that I did with Captivate that I thought was pretty neat was anytime you navigate away from the learning, our learners, I think, because I do it, so I assume everybody does. If it's a boring course, what do? If you're on a Mac, you take your hand and you swipe across like that, and now you're looking at your email, and you do a few emails, and then you swipe back and you look at your course again and advance to the next screen. So what unfocused time tells you is how long that person left your learning or left the focus in your learning window, and then when they came back again. So, in this particular instance, I was away from that for 2 minutes and 48 seconds, all told for the course. And I would expect normally with all the distractions we have, I think you guys can all hear my Slack going nuts in the background here. With all the distractions we have, it's really easy to do that. So a lot of times I would gauge how good is the learning by how often the users would unfocus used for it. If it's really engaging and good, you'll let that Slack message slide for a few minutes before you go do it. If it's okay content, you'll probably see a lot more unfocused time, right? The other thing that I thought was really cool that I was able to accomplish is video stuff in Captivate. So with this wrapper, you're able to see when someone started, stopped, scrubbed, the duration of the scrub, if they rewound the video, how many times they watched the video. All of that information is in there. And then also grouped into context. So let's say you had a course that had 10 different videos and you wanted to see as a whole, how are they interacting with video in my course? I could use the video context that was the category that I used within context. So again, in my LRS, I could say, give me the category video. Here's the ID for that, and show me all the statements associated with it. And that'd be a way I could really see trends. Are people engaging with all 10 of these videos? Or is one video really standing out? And that format seems to work, where the other ones, they're just kind of scrubbing through so they can get to the advanced button and go to the next slide. So here you can see that here's some of those interactions. There was and again, all nameable objects. So a video object inside of Captivate, and you can see I typoed this here, but it was just a quick little 11-second video I found online where a bunny jumps out of his little hole. And so that's what I named it as an object in Captivate. And you can see that all came through in my xAPI, and I'm able to report on that actual interaction. This isn't the whole course. This is just that one video. It was played once, it was paused once, and I didn't scrub this particular one. Here's some other ones where you can see how many times users scrubbed through it. So really some interesting things that we can know. Here's where I use that focused and unfocused time again, kind of slide by slide, so we could see, which slides are the most popular, which one are they spending the most amount of time on. And then, if there is an anomaly like 38 minutes on a slide, either that's a great slide or they navigated away for 35 minutes and then came back. So it can really give you context, because as if you just know that they spent that much time on the slide, it doesn't necessarily mean they're engaged with it, especially if you don't have anything to click on. So this was a neat way to be able to show that. The other thing that's great about xAPI is CMI5 and the way that works with most LRSs. I can't speak to all of them. But in this particular one, if we were to drill into, I believe it's this one. Like all of this, I didn't design any of this because it's a CMI5 interaction. And you may say, what the heck is this? This guy is using all kinds of terms I don't understand. Okay, so let me back up what CMI5 is. CMI5 is the standard that SCORM uses for basically quiz questions and all of those sorts of things. And in xAPI, when you pass a statement, you're also passing the type of statement you're sending. If you pass it as a CMI5 statement, which is what this wrapper does, automatically a lot of LRSs, Watershed I know does for sure, automatically knows what to do with that and can create some really neat reporting here. So all of this, all I did was say, show me the interactions for the CMI5 on this, and it's showing me my scoring, who fell into what buckets, what the average scores were, completions and successes, average time to complete, what gives you some great insights to your questions. You can know, what their answers were, what people are getting wrong, what the average time was to answer that question, just all kinds of great data, because I've always found that one of the hardest things, and I'm not going to use the word instructional designer because I don't feel like I've ever been an instructional designer. I work with some very talented ones, and I'm not them, right? But I do geek out on all the technology that runs instructional design. And I know one of of the hardest things I think to do is to write a good question, because questions are so subjective. Like, it looks great to me and it makes total sense to me, but then I show it to Megan or Leanne and they're like, yeah, I would pick answer D here, and I wouldn't pick it, and so it doesn't always make sense. So having that robust data on how, what people are getting wrong and how often they're getting it wrong in real time can very quickly help you identify those bad questions that might be out there, or those more subjective questions that maybe you need to get a few more sets of eyes on because you're not getting the type of response that you were hoping that you would get out of that sort of thing. So that in a nutshell is, I know it was a ton of information. The one thing I would say, let me just close with this. I absolutely love xAPI. The reason that I changed careers after 21 years was to chase a career where that's what I do full time, is data, xAPI, platforms, and all of that sort of stuff. So if you're like, I'd really like to ask a silly question, but I don't know who to ask, this guy is who you should ask, right? I'm available. I'm on Slack all day long. So if you Slack me in the Torrance Learning Slack channel, I'll see it because, like I said, I'm in Slack all day long. So feel free to ask any questions you may have. There are no such thing as stupid questions. This is such an overwhelming topic when you first begin, but really it's like anything. The more time you spend in it, the easier it gets. And it can really, reap a lot of benefits. I mean, honestly, this may sound a little corny, but I am where I am in my career because of xAPI. I can code today because of xAPI. So, all of these things 5 years ago were not even on my radar. I thought I would be with the company I was with until I retired. I thought, I always was very interested in code and always tech savvy, but could never get over that hump. xAPI got me over that hump. So if it seems overwhelming, just keep plugging away. Probably one of the greatest resources I ever found and inspirations was the Torrance Learning Cohort. I lurked for about 2 cohorts before I pulled the trigger and got active. And I'm so glad that I did. So I encourage all of you that are doing this for the first time, or, that we've shared cohort with before, keep plugging away, because it's just a matter of time and this stuff will seem like a second language to you. So thanks so much for giving me the opportunity to present. And like I said, I'll update in Captivate the GitHub link, a whole bunch of different resources I have for this project, and kind of walk you through it. And like I said, feel free to reach out with any questions you may have. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. And we're going to jump back into our conclusion here. But as Brian said, he's going to share resources in the Slack channel for the team Captivate channel. So go and check that out, and also check him out on Slack if you have any questions that weren't answered here today. And also thank you to everyone who's been very active in the chat, getting to the questions. That is what makes this community amazing and beautiful, is that we have so many thoughtful folks here that can help one another. So let's hop into some cohort business. We have about 7 minutes left to get us through this. So the first thing I want to address is the Kaltura media space. There are lots of folks asking for passwords and how to register. We have access to an amazing platform and tool. It hasn't been shared with you yet. So you will be getting an email with login information on how to log into the media space. Right now, the public access to the recordings are directly on our xAPIcohort.com website. So you can go there to look at the recordings, and that is shared in our Slack channel, our resources channel, and our main channel. Eventually, when everybody is all in the media space, you'll be able to have access to upload your own videos and other media, and you can track activity using the Watershed LRS, the tool. Everyone will have access to that. So if you are trying to log into Kaltura Media Space and you think that you've forgotten your password, you haven't. That's on the way. Just be patient with us for a little while longer while we get that to you. The next thing I wanted to talk about was GitHub, because in the next few weeks, we will have teams reporting out and sending status updates. And if anybody remembers from Web Session 1, by when, what is Kaltura Media Space? That's a good question. The Media Space is the video hosting platform. It's a media hosting platform. So think like a a YouTube, they would hate for us to say it, but think like it's a video hosting platform. And we are using the Kaltura Neuro live classroom right now. And so when the recordings are done, they'll be hosted there. GitHub is a repository and a collaborative workspace. It is also the tool, the platform that we use in order to update our team websites. So if you go to xAPIcohort.com, you can go to Teams and you'll see that there's already a fall 2020 team listing. That is what your updates will automatically populate to our website by using your GitHub team page. So the way that you can join a team page for GitHub, there is a team bot, which in Slack. So if you hover over a message, you can choose the More Actions menu, and down it'll say Join Cohort GitHub. Fill out the form with the team if you already have a team, or if there's a team that's already on there, and your email address, and that'll get you access to GitHub. So if you want to take a screenshot of this slide, this is your tutorial on how to get access. We'll also be posting this in Slack, but that is forthcoming. And by Wednesday at 5 p.m. every week, not next week because we're not there yet, we're going to ask you to be submitting your team update. So it's really important that you get into the GitHub, you start that GitHub page with your team, so that way we can know what you're doing and the public can also know what you're doing, because it's going to be hosted right on our website. All right, so let's get into the questions around how do I get people to join a team? How do I find a team? How do I provide a project brief? How do I do those things? So teams are already forming. I see Kaltura is already a team. I see some other teams forming in our Slack. That is where you're going to find the teams that are forming, is directly in Slack. You can go look at if you go to in your Slack channel, if you go to the xAPI Cohort Slack channel, and you go up to the channels tab, there's a little plus sign, and that's where you can add channels. And when you go and browse channels, you can see in alphabetical order, like Megan said in the chat today, what teams exist, and you can just go in and join and look and see what they're doing. All of the teams will be notated with the word team in front. So that's the prefix you want to look for in order to see if it's a team or a discussion channel. Successful cohort teams have something called a description, a project brief, and a name, right? So the things that you're going to need as you're thinking about, hey, I want to create a team. I already browsed Slack. I saw that there were some teams that exist. These aren't really the things that I'm interested in. I want to do a team specific on XYZ, right? What you're going to do is create a team name. So use the prefix team dash, if you were going to do Captivate.js library like Brian Floyd, right? And then you would create your Slack channel. You would create a GitHub repository or GitHub team page and come up with a project brief. Your project brief is going to include your question or area you want to explore, and a use case for the context. So for example, if it was Team Captivate, their use case is they want to create a robust, reusable, and intuitive xAPI JavaScript wrapper for Captivate. That is what Brian just showed us, and that was the project brief that they used, right? You're also going to need to think about when and where you're going to meet with your team in order to practice and iterate and build together. You're going to want to think about how you're sending the statements. So what is the tool that you're going to use to send statements? Today we learned about e-learning tools. Next week we're going to learn about things that are not e-learning tools. You want to think about your LRS. Where are the statements going? Where is the data going? What is your learning record store? And then every week, your weekly update will be submitted right on GitHub. And we'll need someone that's going to actually give that update during these web sessions, so that way your team has presence. So if you have an idea and you're ready to hop in, set up a Slack channel and post a description in the main channel to invite people to join. So a good example of that, Aaron Steller posted about Kaltura, right, in the main channel. If you have no idea, don't worry. Start checking out the Slack teams and see what's going on and see what looks good. Join in, contribute, attend meetings, and do some work. Or you can just observe. Just joining a Slack channel doesn't commit you to anything. And with that, we're right at the top of the hour. So here are a few good tidbits to know. Next week, we're going to be right here at the same time in our New Row Kaltura New Row live room. The link is there. It is also in our xAPI Gnome Twitter profile, and it's also sent out in your weekly emails and in our main Slack channel. Next week, we're going to be learning about sending something from that's not e-learning from Matt Cleaver. And we are also, you can register for Party. So Party is December 11th. It's all online and virtual this year. You can register. The link is there. And as always, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to email me, Jess, at jjackson@torrance Learning, or you can just message me directly in Slack. With that, thank you all for being here. Thank you to our presenters for sharing out your knowledge and expertise. We'll be connected in Slack, and I'll see you next week.